of.
So, hello there, and welcome to episode 64 of the Next Level podcast. This is actually the first episode that we do in English, which is specifically for our guest, John Romero. And we will also have to introduce ourselves to audiences outside our regular Romanian viewership. So, I'm Vlad, and John, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm John Romero, and I'm a game maker. Been making games for a long time, and I'm still making them.
Oh, yeah. I look forward to Empire of Sin, by the way. But before that, let's just introduce ourselves. So, Mihai,
Yeah,
Kimo?
hi. I'm Mihai. I'm just a usual gamer. I am currently a student of architecture, but I don't want to do that when I finish. I want to do something related to game design or art. So, yeah.
Oh, hey, I'm Kimo. I'm a mixed video games journalist. And right now I'm doing a podcast.
And I'm Adrian. I don't work in gaming. I'd like to at some point. And I just happen to be in a podcast because I'm friendly with these guys. So, and I also enjoy gaming a lot. And I would like to add, first of all, John, thank you very much for joining our podcast. This is quite a big deal for us. So thank you for being here, man. You're awesome.
Thanks. No problem.
Okay, so can I ask the first question?
Sure,
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so I was 10 years old when I had my first computer, and one of the first free games that I got on a floppy disk was Dangerous Dave, the first one. And I could never finish it. I think I got to level 8 or 9. The one with the trees. So the first one with the trees and the spiders, that's where I got stuck. And I just wanted to know because in level 2, there is a writing that's made out of textures and it says PCR. And when my father saw me playing, he was like, "What does that mean? Partidul Comunist Român," which means Romanian Communist Party. And I always wanted to know what that means.
All right, and you still don't know, right?
I don't.
All right. You haven't searched the internet. You haven't Googled or anything, huh?
Nah, not really.
Okay, so when I started the Gamer's Edge department, which is where Dangerous Dave is published at Softdisk, originally at the beginning, the name that marketing came up with was PC Arcade. So it's the PC and then RCADE. So PC Arcade was the name that they came up with. And then they found out that someone else had PC Arcade trademarked. So they couldn't use that name. So they had to come up with another name, which is Gamer's Edge. And that's why it's published under Gamer's Edge, but it was originally PC Arcade. So in Dangerous Dave, I put PCR in there as the name, because when I made Dangerous Dave, that's what the name actually was. So if I knew that it was changed to Gamer's Edge, I would have made a GE instead in there. But it was PC Arcade, and then they changed the name, but Dangerous Dave was already on a disc and being sent to a whole bunch of people. And and when they were sending our disc to people, they had just changed the name to Gamer's Edge, so they already knew that it was going to be changed. So it was just like the timing was just barely off. We had to start making our first game together, which was called Slordax, and so Dangerous Dave had PCR in it. And then when I re-released the game in 2015, when I put Dangerous Dave out there again in 2015 for iOS, I changed the PCR to be FPS. So that's like what happened after Dangerous Dave was the FPS.
I think this is probably the most random fact about Dangerous Dave on the internet right now.
Yeah, probably is. And it's amazing how many people have played Dangerous Dave. The very first one. In India and in Pakistan, when you bought a brand new computer, they installed that game on it along with like Minesweeper and the other games that are in Windows. So people would play Solitaire, Minesweeper, or Dave. So I've met so many people and gotten so many emails from people who like played Dangerous Dave as the first game because it came on their computer.
Actually,
that's
a pretty cool
amazing.
fact.
Yeah,
I'm-
India and Pakistan. That's where it was like installed as part of the OS.
Yeah, also you have no idea how many computers came with id Software games in the 90s and early 2000s. I think you are one of the biggest companies to leave permanent memories in the minds of children of the late 90s and early 2000s in Romania.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, they were definitely more exciting. You know, the games were more exciting than the games that came before, which were very static screen strategy and RPG and stuff that was like moved really slowly. And we'd played tons of games like that for many years before we started making really fast games because we were like, we want fast games on the PC, and the PC just wasn't good enough with the apparent hardware that it had. But after discovering the panning register in the EGA chipset, that's how we could do Commander Keen and make a side-scrolling game that was, you know, as smooth as a Nintendo. So when you use the panning registers of the EGA chipset, and you're gonna pan the screen between like from pixel 0 to pixel 1, it actually smoothly pans. It doesn't just like go 0 1 pixel. You know, it's like it actually pans between them the way a Nintendo smoothly pans, or an Amiga or a Commodore. So we kind of unlocked the secrets of side scrolling on the PC and immediately made Commander Keen, and then the other set of Commander Keen games. And Dangerous Dave also kind of benefits from it too. It's the same trick.
Yeah, that was a big thing. I saw the documentary
High Score.
High Score, yeah, recently, and I learned about all that stuff.
Nice. Yeah, that was a lot of that was a huge breakthrough. That was pretty cool because that was the only time. That was the first time, at least, that had ever happened with me, because I've been learning a lot of stuff about computers and programming since I was 11. But that was the first time that something happened that I knew that no one had seen before, which is really rare. You know, so I was like unbelievably shocked when it happened, and I couldn't work for at least 3 hours, and I was just like so excited because I knew this is the beginning of a new era on this computer, and we're the ones that are going to be able to do it. So that's why I wanted to start the company. And id Software was actually my fourth startup company at that time.
Oh, right. So you were already a businessman.
Yeah, I already had 3 other companies before that, and I worked at Origin Systems, which made all the Ultima games back in the day.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I worked there while they were making Ultima 5. That was in 87 and 88. But yeah, I had a startup company just after Origin, where I did the Commodore 64 port of Might and Magic 2, which is also another big RPG back in the 80s.
I'm really curious. What are those 2 arcades behind you?
Street Fighter 2 and Pac-Man.
Oh, nice. You still use them from time to time?
Yeah, especially
really
the
cool.
Pac-Man. The Pac-Man one's great. I love Pac-Man.
Do you have the high scores on them, or is it someone else?
I do. Everyone's trying, but it's not going to happen. I played so much Pac-Man. It's the game that really got me into game design.
Oh, I didn't really knew that.
Yeah, it was because back in the 70s, I played tons of pinball like everyone because there were no video games. But as soon as video games started appearing, it was basically shoot the alien with the ship. Like that's kind of what it turned into. And there was just tons of it. And in Space Invaders, you know, in Asteroids, and just like everything was like a ship shooting stuff. Even the first game, like Computer Space, was ships shooting other spaceships. So it's always sci-fi kind of thing. And then here comes Pac-Man in 1980 that has nothing to do with anything sci-fi. It's just like this abstract thing. Its color, which was huge. Like I think Galaga may have been the first color game just before Pac-Man, like months before Pac-Man, and then Pac-Man came out But Pac-Man also had this amazing sound chip in it that no one had heard before, and it was like at the time the sound was unbelievable, and the color looked great, and the game design was nothing like anyone had seen before, and there was a quarter shortage in the United States because everybody spent 4 billion quarters in the year of 1980. So Pac-Man made $1 billion in 1980. It was crazy.
I thought that only happened in Japan with
It
the
happened there
100
too. It happened in Japan as well.
Crazy, man.
Yeah, it was a huge game. It's funny because you guys in video game history, you know about the crash of 1983 and 84 that was due to oversaturation of the console market for the Atari VCS consoles during that Christmas of 83 where the stores were just packed full of stuff. That actually wasn't the first video game crash that happened in the industry. The first video game crash in the industry happened in 1977 because there were too many Pong clones.
Really?
Like they had a ton of machines out there that were just Pong machines that would only play Pong, like the Fairchild Channel F, I think the Bally Astrocade. There's a bunch of consoles that were out in the 70s that were just Pong, and they would rename variants of Pong like hockey and all kinds of stuff like that. And that's all you like. The stores were packed full of them, and everyone was tired of buying them, and so the market crashed in 1977. And that's the year that the 3 most important personal computers were introduced that started the personal computer revolution, which was the PET, the Commodore PET, the Apple II, and the TRS-80 Model 1.
Do you think that can happen nowadays with all the diversity that we have?
It might. You never know, because there were a lot. I mean, just think about it. There was a crash because there were so many machines that played Pong. There was a lot of hardware back there where you would think, oh, there was this one Pong thing and nothing else happened. The market was full of people ripping off Pong. It was insane, and also home computers. You might think, oh, there was just the Atari 800 and the Commodore 64 and the Apple II, and then there's like the TI 994A and some other smaller like Sinclair ZX81 and some European type stuff. But there were insane amounts of computers in the 80s. There were so many that they were trying anything to be like different than all the other stuff. So most computers back in the 80s, they had BASIC in ROM, so you could turn it on and just start programming it in BASIC. Some computers, like I think it was called a Jupiter, it had a joystick on the side of the keyboard, and it had the language Forth in ROM to be different. And like there were so many other computers out that had all kinds of wacky like feature sets and stuff in them. They all died because that wasn't like those languages aren't easy to program, and the hardware's too weird. Like someone put a joystick in the middle of the keyboard between the G and the H as well. It's like, well, you're not going to hit it with your hands because your fingers are, if you're a touch typist. But like there were so many weird things back then. So the market was also oversaturated with computers for the house, and it was hard for people to figure out like which ones they should buy. So it was all about marketing money, putting TV ads, to William Shatner marketing stuff, and the Commodore, I think it was. But everybody the market was crazy back then too. So there were a lot of things, and then it settled down into the machines that kind of, could stay in the market. People that wanted computers that played games was like the Commodore 64 was cheap. It was a cheap computer that you could get for $500 and do that. And the Atari 800 was, I think, maybe a little bit more expensive. That was a really nice machine. The Apple II was like the most expensive one, I think, back then. But it was older than the Atari and the Commodore because they came out in '82, I think. So they're 5 years younger. But yeah, so there's always been a ton of like copycats and people trying to fill the market with other things. When something wins, everybody wants something like the winner, but not 100%. So they're all trying something, and it's been that way since the whole market began. So, it's going to keep going. it's still gonna happen. Something else will come out, and then maybe it'll be the killer app. We'll see.
Do you think it
The
could be
killer
likely?
hardware.
Because like right now, the market is, at least on the hardware side, it's a pretty even split between two tech giants, right?
Yep.
So we've got Intel and AMD, and that's about it.
Yeah, but remember we had Sega. Sega was there for a really long time.
Yeah, on the
Um,
hardware side.
there could be another company that decides to come in with a ton of money. A company that everybody knows.
Apple
Never
just
know.
started making their own processors again.
Yep.
So I think they
Yeah.
gave up
Apple
on Intel.
Silicon and
Yeah.
and the Apple Arcade. So you never know. Like it's from left field, here comes Apple.
Are you excited on Apple getting back to gaming? Because they've been away for quite a while. They were very popular with the Apple II, but after that, it seems like they kind of drifted away into a certain direction, a different one.
Well, the funny thing about Apple is that they only embraced gaming when they started the company, and they started like the company started because Steve Wozniak wanted to build a computer that could play Breakout. So in software and not in hardware. Like that's why he made the Apple. So because he made Breakout as well. He made the Atari game Breakout. So he wanted to do that in software because he thought like the hardware is fast enough right now that you could actually put together a computer that could play Breakout in software where you're just programming it, and it's not like burned into the hardware, which is much faster. So when he made the Apple II, the first thing he did was make a Breakout clone called Little Brickout. Brickout is like Breakout, and it was horizontal instead of vertical because Breakout's vertical. So he did his own version of it in low res mode, and it was a cool little game, and people learned a lot from just looking at the listing, and that was his gaming thing, was to do that. And so many people started making games on the Apple II, but he that was it for him. He just needed to make a computer that did that game, and that was it for gaming. And Apple, Steve Jobs was all about marketing the thing for schools and trying to get business in there, and VisiCalc was a really big part of the Apple II being adopted in business. One of the I think Steve Jobs, I think, was kind of solidifying his viewpoint on who he should sell to, and he decided probably in the Apple II era that he needs to sell to people and not companies. And Microsoft is the opposite. Microsoft wants to sell to enterprise and people, because if it's at work, then people will buy it for home, they hope, right? And Apple's thing is, if people all have it at home, then maybe they'll bring it to work. Maybe they'll buy the thing for work. So it's the opposite approach that Apple has. So it's all for the people. Do things that are best for the people versus let's do things that are best for businesses. Which is what Microsoft's focus is. So Apple didn't focus on games after that. The market on the Apple II is massive in games, not due to Apple helping at all. They didn't put cool hardware in the Apple IIe or the GS or anything that could make games as good as a Commodore, or an Amiga or whatever. So they never really supported games, but now finally, even at the beginning of the iOS and stuff, they weren't like big proponents of game stuff. So just recently, they finally, with the Apple Arcade subscription and highlighting games and stuff, have they really adopted games, knowing that is one of the successful parts of their formula is the amount of people that play games on their hardware. So now they're accepting it and kind of helping it out.
Yeah, and you will also release Empire of Sin on Mac OS, which is unusual for video game companies to do nowadays.
Yeah, it's weird that it doesn't make sense to me that that people aren't making, especially if you're using Unity or using Unreal. There's no excuse, because you tell it to build that Mac version, build Windows and then build Mac, because it works like that.
It's literally just a click, right?
It's like you select it and click it. And the thing is, sure, there's debugging when something goes wrong. If there's some kind of weird shader that you're doing that doesn't work on Apple's Metal versus Vulkan or whatever, and that's the Unity has standardized a lot of stuff. So there's not really a reason why something doesn't work on Mac, because the hardware on a Mac is really fast. I don't use Windows computers. I don't develop with them. So I use Macs all day long. Now since 2007, that has been my development machine, is a Mac. So right now I have a Mac Pro, which is 96 gigs of RAM. The video card has 32 gigs of RAM. It's like one of the fastest video cards made. You know, it's a super fast machine. It's got 12 processors.
Would you have
24
imagined
hyperthreads.
this when you were working on Keen or Doom or stuff like that? That one day the hardware would reach these kinds of possibilities?
We didn't. Yeah, I mean, it was too fast to understand back then. Like Moore's law had to be in effect for so long to get that kind of doubling, you know, effect to get to the speed that we're at now. And it's funny to see that Intel was worried for a little bit that Moore's law was going to finally end, but they have discovered some new technologies that will continue Moore's law being in effect,
it
doubling.
keeps going.
Yeah. Yep. So yeah, so they're figuring new things out, not just the physical limitations of heat and getting processors together, but to keep that, you know, to keep it going, to keep the actual speed of a single core going higher, which was the limitation based on physics. The way that Moore's law was staying in effect was because systems are becoming multi-core, and you're able to like double the amount of cores inside of a system, and then like they were doubling with hyperthreads and stuff. So they're now going back to the lowest level and being able to get it faster at that level now, and not just making it scale with multi-core. So yeah, it's pretty cool. And there's a technology called Memristors, which I'm not sure if it's being used in this new Intel, probably AMD as well, but it's a technology that was the Memristor was discovered in 2008 as the fourth foundational leg of electronics that has always been there and no one knew it existed, but they theorized that it existed in the 70s. And it was discovered in Silicon Valley in 2008. And it explained all of the electronics books when you got to a certain point where the formulas kind of broke down and they just had to tell you, like, for guidance, here's what you should be calculating when things get this small or things get this hot, to do this. And so the Memristor was finally discovered because the technology was available at HP's lab in Palo Alto, I think it was, to actually identify that this is the fourth leg of electronics that explains all of the weirdness that they couldn't actually understand in all the books. So they have to basically rewrite all the books. But what it comes down to is, you know how flash memory holds data, and when you turn off power to it, it still retains data. You put electricity back into flash memory, and you can still read the state of it. And it takes a shitload of transistors to make that happen, to make that actually work. Well, Memristors is at the atomic level that flash type of state holding without power. So a Memristor is able to have power put through it to change it to be zeros or ones, and you can turn everything off and it still retains its state, which means that we will be able to have computers that are way less power to keep them going. So you know how computers need the RAM refresh to keep everything in memory going? You won't need that anymore, because you'll just zap it with a little piece of, a little bit of electricity to change its state when you need to change it, but not course electricity through it constantly to keep RAM refreshed and holding memory. So it's going to drop the use, at least for the memory, it's going to drop the use of electricity to refresh RAM, which really helps phones, because phones also have memory that have to hold data constantly until you shut them off fully.
Which is probably why the battery drains so quickly.
Yeah,
Well,
battery drains depending on there's a lot of tricks that batteries are doing right now. Like the iPhone 11 Pro Max has technology in it that only sends battery power to the piece of the CPU and the components that need it for whatever it's doing, instead of giving the entire CPU power. So if a notification comes in, the phone only gets power for the components that are required to process that notification. So now you can go to sleep, at 100% and wake up at like 98%. And that's right now on the iPhone Pro Max. And that's not even using Memristors. That's just super efficient use and super efficient design of the processors and all the components to segment it out into hundreds of power zones and only power the zone that needs to process the current thing. So it's really cool. If you go ahead and you can Google this up and read about it, but it's like really advanced memory management, power management that they're doing on the iPhone 11 Pro. And so I'm sure everything's going to start doing it. It just takes more design.
I wouldn't have guessed that you would be this passionate about hardware, but I guess it goes back to that saying that if you want to build software, you also need to understand hardware or try to build it yourself.
I think that's if you want to build good software.
Yep. Well, the funny thing is, like, being excited about hardware, like the most excited I am about hardware is mostly phones. And that, like, I'm always looking forward to the next iPhone, and that's because I'm looking forward to the next hardware. Sure, I'm looking forward to iOS 14. I have it right now. I have the beta 7 right now on my phone. But, I always like getting the latest OS and the latest hardware. But both of them changing every year is just like really, really cool in the Apple ecosystem. And the Mac Pro has been many years in the waiting to actually get something that's like it's a proper, like, tower case, except the design of the inside is insane. It's like the cleanest, most beautiful interior of a computer that looks nothing like today's interiors of computers with LEDs and stuff all over the place. It's really clean. If you go to Apple's site and look at the Mac Pro interior, you'll see like it's incredibly clean, and it has like scalable components. So if you want to add a component because you're doing lots of video, making movies, and you need to process 8K video really fast, they have modules you can just plug in, and that's built to process 8K video super fast. Like to have multiple videos going at once and live editing and stuff. Really neat.
Yeah, this feels very wholesome because you started out as the guy who was porting games on the Apple II computer, and now you're still passionate about what Apple does, and you're going to build your latest game on the Apple ecosystem. And possibly, I hope they bring it to arcade too, even though I have a Nintendo Switch, and that's where I will get Empire of Sin.
Yeah, the Switch version as well. Been a huge Nintendo fan, since '85. Also, Apple II stuff. That port of Might and Magic 2 was that was in '88, and I'd been programming the Apple II since '82, and so I made a shitload of games on the Apple II before I got to Might and Magic 2. Like Wolfenstein was in '92, and that was game number 87 that I had made, and Doom was 90, game number 90.
What's your current count?
It's 100 something. I mean, Doom was 90 in 1993, so it's at least 150.
It kind of makes sense, that kind of Doom came out the way it did. Like you already had a ton of experience.
Yeah.
Well, that's why helps.
That's why the software worked really well, because all of us, there were only 4 of us that started the company, but by the time the 4 of us got together, we all had 10 years of game development experience on a daily basis. So we each had made lots of games, like Tom Hall, who people know as like this massively creative guy who designs everything. Like he's just like the most creative person I've met, was an assembly language programmer on the Apple II. He had written dozens of adventure games and arcade games and all kinds of stuff before we got together. And then he finally had the chance to just be a pure design person, and he didn't need to code anymore, so he could just focus on that. But he had already coded for 10 years in assembly. So, like we all had lots of experience. And that's why, and it was the first time any of us had ever worked with another person on the same game, just because the 80s were full of everybody making their own thing, just one person. So when you look at the big games in the 80s, those were made by one person, like Lode Runner and Choplifter and all of those games. One person made each of those games.
That seems absolutely amazing, given that nowadays a big budget game like ends up being produced by hundreds of people. It costs hundreds of millions of dollars, and it takes years to make.
Yeah, Assassin's Creed, like 1,500 people.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, there's like 30 companies involved too. It's not
I remember finishing Red Dead Redemption 2, and the credits were like 37 minutes long or something like that. So
thousands of people. Yeah. I know these big games, they're massive bets, but they're bets that people, they know that they will pay off. When you look at a Call of Duty or you look at a Battlefield, those games are actually going to sell really well because there's really great marketing, but there's a built-in expectation and a built-in fan base that wants that game. So it's almost like it can't fail, but internally they got to make sure that they are making the thing everybody is thinking of playing. So like,
do you think that kind of limits their creative expression?
Not really, because they know that the next iteration of that franchise needs to be more than the previous one, but it also has to retain a lot of the things that people love about it. So that's the part that's less risky, the part that people already love about it, that they need to make sure works really well in the next version of it. It needs to work as well or better than the previous. And it's fine. Like, people love riding the horse and riding in an open world and streaming and all that. That has to be in it for Red Dead to be the game that people were hoping for. So it's not like they're going to go, guess what? We're going to mix it up and forget the horse. We're going to have something, right? It's like, you're going to lose. You can't do that. Yeah. People are expecting a horse. Now, more stuff with the horse would be cool. Like I don't think people expected Breath of the Wild to have so much stuff happening with horses. There was a lot more design in a horse in Breath of the Wild. Then like previous Zeldas had.
I think Vlad is a bit of an expert on that because I don't have a Switch, so I haven't really played it.
One of the best games ever made.
Yeah, so I do live streams with Breath of the Wild, and this is my second playthrough, and I do it in a different order, and it's unintentional because there's a lot of stuff that comes your way and distracts you, like some sort of shooting star that you see on the sky or some dragon that you see and chase. And yeah, I discovered that I can ride deers, which, I had no idea it was even possible.
Wow. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's definitely one of my favorite games. Like, I will always get Zelda. Like, whenever there's a new Zelda coming out, I'm always going to be playing it.
Are you also excited about the Hyrule Warriors one, which is a prequel of Breath of the Wild, but in a different style?
Yep. Yeah, basically any Zelda I'm excited about. I don't even care what's in it because they're just going to make something amazing. They haven't had a bad one except maybe 2, but that was an experiment.
The ones on the CDI, I guess.
Yep, the Philips CDI, yeah.
Excuse me, princess.
Yeah.
So actually, I'm going to come back to the question that Vlad had before we actually started the podcast. So we all look to you as, legendary game designer and as an inspiration. Quite a lot of us and quite a lot of people that want to get into gaming look at you. So who does John Romero look at for inspiration? Who do you look up to?
I look up to indies that do really cool experimental stuff that I think is worthwhile. People that make really cool, they don't have to be big games. They just have to be inventive. Like there's a game, a recent indie game that I played called A Short Hike that was just what a great little game. You know, if I'd made a Facebook game called Ravenwood Fair that millions and millions of people loved it. It was 25 million people a month were playing it for, I don't know, a few years. And, you know, because it was on Facebook and it has billions of people on it. And it was also on, you know, Facebook was about 12 million of those people, and the other 13 were a lot of other networks like Orkut and, you know, in Russian networks. So it was all over the place. And a lot of people played it. And this game, A Short Hike, is almost like that could have been a sequel to Ravenwood Fair. And I played it, and it's just like the music is so great. It's a small game. It'll take an hour, you know, to play it, maybe 2 hours. It's super fun to play because you're just flying around as a bird. But you're like, you're looking for stuff constantly. There's so many secrets hidden in that game, and you're trying to find every one of them, because like you turn into a completist, I think, when you're picking them all up, because you're like looking for the little shiny glint of something. So the game is not that big. It's like an island, and you can fly around that island and go up really high, and the flying is really fun and it's really easy. And it has just it's a super positive game. The music is some of the best video game music for that kind of game. Super positive, fun experience. And that's like, those are the people I look up to that have these really great experiences. They make something that I want to play for hours. And make me want more. You know, I want more of it. Now I have like heroes from the early game industry that I looked up to when I was learning how to program. Nasser Jabeli was probably the first one that I really paid attention and looked up to. He was an Iranian American programmer who created, in 1 year, he had 9 hit games on the list, the top 30 list. In 1 year, he had 9 of the top 30 games. He was unbelievably prolific. He was super fast, super smart. He was, you know, pretty close to Silicon Valley. He lived in Sacramento, and he decided he did this only for a few years before he decided to start his own company called Jabeli Software. And unfortunately, it happened right when it was just like the year before the video game crash. But he actually made more money with that company than he did when he was like making all these hits. And then he went on a vacation for 2 years. I think he was on a vacation for 2 years. He just traveled around the world, and when he came back, he talked to his friend who was the owner of Broderbund Software, which was a really big game company in the 80s. It was actually big productivity software as well, like the print shop, if you remember that. Like everybody had the print shop. Like that was like having Word, you know. It was like the program everybody had. He came back and asked Doug, you know, what should I get into? I'm thinking about getting back into game stuff. And Doug said, sure, there's a company called Square that you should probably talk to. And so he basically moved to Japan, and he made Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3. So he was a programmer on those 3 games. So he was already like this god, a god of the Apple II, making all of these amazing games. And then he wrote Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 and saved that company.
That's
amazing. You know, he did a couple games before that, like Rad Racer, 3D World Runner. He'd made some stuff before he then did Final Fantasy, but that's when like that team got together with Hironobu Sakaguchi, and you know, that was just amazing.
It's funny, I actually have Rad Racer on a cartridge, so if I knew you were going to mention it, I would have brought it just to show it up.
Yeah, I got a Rad Racer cartridge, I think from Nasser. He gave me Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 on one cartridge, a Japanese cartridge. I have his original NES hardware that he used to make Final Fantasy. So all of the cards that you would plug into an NES for the cartridge part, and then like an Apple II, because he wrote everything on the Apple II. And I have the Super Nintendo hardware dev unit that was used to make Secret of Mana, because he wrote Secret of Mana as well. So he's just like incredible. So I have his original Apple II that he used to make all those games back in the early 80s. And then I have his hardware that he used to create Final Fantasy and the hardware he used to create Secret of Mana. Yeah, so we keep in touch every once in a while, and I've interviewed him for hours that I put into my podcast. It's called Apple Time Warp. And that's what I'm doing at 7:00. I'm going to interview Stuart Smith for another episode of my podcast about his games. And so yeah, I still love to kind of do some digging in history with people that haven't been interviewed or revealed as much as other people. Bill Budge was another one of my early inspirations, who created the pinball construction set. He did Raster Blaster, which was like the first really amazing pinball machine on a computer. And then he did the pinball construction set, which let everybody make pinball machines. And back then there weren't really hard drives, so you would take a floppy disk and put it in the computer and make a pinball machine, and then tell it that you wanted that on the disk, and it would format the disk and make it bootable right into that pinball machine. So it was really cool to just pass your pinball machine creations to like 10 friends if you wanted. If you had those discs, you could just give it away. But his programming was just like the best. He was like an absolute expert. It was all in assembly language. He wrote articles in a magazine called Soft Talk that taught people how to program the way that he programmed stuff. So he, in assembly language. So there's articles teaching assembly language that he wrote, back in the early 80s. And his computer is at the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York, and my Apple II is right next to his. And what I'm trying to do is to get Nasser's on the other side of mine, so all three of us can be in that museum.
That's like the Mount Rushmore of computers.
Yeah.
I definitely got to visit that place now.
Yeah, it's really cool. Brenda has one of her games there, board games that she made. And my Apple II is there, and they had a really cool induction ceremony. We were both at we were all at the induction ceremony, and they were saying stuff, and I got to say stuff, and I got some pictures of my Apple II on display, which was pretty cool. But yeah, that was the computer that we got in 1982, and I made a lot of games on it, and now it's been in the museum for years now.
I'm really curious.
Sorry.
Vlad, you can go ahead if you want.
Okay, I'll let you go after me. But I was about to ask you, because you mentioned what you play for inspiration, and you mentioned the arcade cabinets behind you. But I was curious to know what you play for just relaxation, just to enjoy playing a video game.
I just got off of Ghost Recon Breakpoint just before I started doing this. So that's like one of my favorite games right now is Ghost Recon Breakpoint. And I had horrible reviews when it first came out, because I guess there were expectations from people because they played Wildlands, and Breakpoint wasn't doing some things that people were expecting, or it was doing things that people didn't like. So they have worked on it for a year now, and so they've done a lot of fixing to the game, to the point where players can choose what the game design should be for them. So there's like, the game is like this really amazing loot grabbing game where when you get loot, it's got a quality to it, like rare, epic, or legendary type quality, or uncommon. And so it's got 4 levels. And so you're basically just killing stuff, and you're looting and getting better weapons or better qualities of your weapons. And there's like a shitload of weapons in the game. And it has all kinds of AR in it to know where the enemies are, and you can tag them. You can like throw drones up and tag everything with drones, and it lets you see everything that you want to kill. And then they have a mode that's immersive mode, which turns all of that shit off. So you have 0 loot crates. Like, you're not going out trying to get new weapons. You can get new weapons, but it mostly the only way you can get new weapons is if you open a crate that has a weapon in it, versus the other mode where you can just pop up your list and change to any weapon you want at any time. Like, I just ran out of ammo, let me just switch to an assault rifle that has ammo. Like, you could do that. But they have an immersive mode which gets rid of all the gameism stuff, and the game is made, the game design changes to be you as if you were really outside with a gun. You have to operate like that. There is no visual anything to help you. Like the HUD is gone. You only know that you have some bullets and you know what your health is, but you have no mini map. You don't know where anyone is around you. You can hear them, but like that's it. That's all you get. So it's like realistic mode, and you can change the difficulty to be like super hard on your tactical, super hard on your on the enemies. So yeah, you get to just basically play with the entire game design to get exactly what you want. So it's like it, even with the quests, the game has thousands of quests, and if you want to go on a quest, sometimes the game will tell you that there's one nearby, or if you're on the main quest line, you can it basically gives you hints about where the next location is that you need to go for that next thing. Or you can be in guided mode where it absolutely just shows you where it's at. So you get to choose, do you want to play the realistic one where you just like hear where it should be? Like it says it's in this zone south of this mountain near this thing, and it's like you can try and pinpoint where that is, or you can just have an AR marker on the map that just tells you where it's at, and you just go fly straight towards it in a helicopter. So you get
they're like, where's south?
Yeah, so you can choose anything you want, and you can change it anytime in live mode. Like while you're playing, you can change the game design. And if you're playing with someone else and they have the completely different mode going, it works for both of you. So someone that you're playing with in co-op mode can be doing all the crazy loot crate stuff and seeing where everything is around them and stuff, and the other person's in immersive mode and they only know what they know, and you can both be playing together in co-op mode. And so if you want, the other guy can say, well, there's a guy right over here, or not. But it's cool that anybody that's playing in the same group can have their own stats and their own game design fully customized just for them as they're playing with all these other people who have the same thing all customized. So it's like the most freeform game design options I've seen in a game that is, it's not an MMO, but it's an open world game that is single player and co-op multiplayer, and it has raids. So you can have people go to a special place. You have to have a gear score above a certain number to actually enter these raids. And it has PvP, and so it's got all this stuff in it that if you read Reddit, people on Reddit will just like rip on it like it's way worse than Wildlands, and Wildlands is the best game ever. And I stopped playing Wildlands because it's just too easy, and Breakpoint is actually really difficult. If you crank all the difficulty up, it's super fun.
Yeah, I was really curious about something. Now, what would you say would be a good start for someone who wants to begin creating games on their own nowadays? With the idea in mind that you want to get somewhere with those games further in life, not just making them for yourself like that.
Yeah, well, you need to do it seriously. You should have at least a plan for what you want to do. By like, what is the purpose for making these games? Obviously, at the beginning, it should be to get better at making games, because you've never made one, right? At the very beginning, you've never made one.
Yeah.
You've played tons of games, but I'll tell you, making them is not like playing them. It is completely different. It takes so long to make a game, right? Even a really small game. Like if you think Pac-Man, like just try and make Pac-Man. It's difficult if you don't know how to make them. So focus on making a small game. Just come up with something that's a really small design, and then depending on what your personal goals are, if your personal goals are to learn how to code, that's what you would focus on. But if your personal goal is, I just want to like make a game with the team, then go find people that can be on your team that can code and do art. And what part are you going to do? If you're going to do the art, find someone that can do the design, and find someone that can do the coding. Keep the team really small to 3 or 4 people, and find someone who's focused on each of those disciplines. So you need a designer and a programmer and an artist. Those are the 3 people you need at the beginning. Of course, if you're a designer and you can code, you can do that, right? You can be multiple disciplines. We have a coder who is an amazing artist, on our team. So you can have multiple disciplines. It's just rarer. It's harder to find those people. But you either put together a real small 3 or 4 person team, or you start to learn how to do your discipline as well as you can. If you're a programmer, if you're going to learn how to code, then that means you're going to be able to make your own games immediately. If you're going to be an artist, then you're going to need to use something to put your art into to make games. You're either going to be, you're still going to need a programmer to make games, like no matter what. So you have to find some other people that want to do the same thing as you, which is to be on a team and to maybe create a little company. And, I would suggest that at the very beginning, try and find people that are as passionate as you, and then split the company up into that many, pieces. However number of people there are, keep it even. If there's 3 people, 33%, 4 people, 25%, that kind of thing. Keep it even so everybody feels like they are equal to everybody else. So it's not like, well, he owns most of it, so I don't really care as much. Everyone needs to be kind of equally invested in it. But don't think that your first game is going to make any money. Your first games are there to just learn how to make games. And a lot of times it's really hard to like start making games from the beginning and stay the course of with the design to actually stay the course with the design, because when you're in it making a game, it's totally different than, I know all the stuff about games because I've played them forever. You're supposed to do this if this, you know all this stuff about games, but if you don't write it down and focus on it, it's easy to kind of stray from the path, because being in it and making it will make you experiment with a lot of different stuff. But there reasons why games do things the way they do them. So always, if you can, take the lessons of games that have been made already and try and emulate some of those options for your game. It's like, well, I really like the health system in this game and I think it'll work here. That's great. If you're trying to invent new systems constantly, then I think that you're taking too many steps to making games. I think you need to just focus on the craft of it before you start designing things that no one's ever seen before. You need to get good at making them and show that you can deliver a game before coming up with things that no one's seen before or played before. So those first games, you want to get them out of the way first, which is just like, can I code? Can I do art in 3D for a pipeline? Can I make textures? Can I blah, 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 right? It's a lot of that kind of stuff. So to get that out of the way, you make your first games really small. Just come up with a little idea and you will learn a ton from just making that. From just making a Pac-Man game, you will learn so much, because to make a Pac-Man game is actually a lot of programming. There's a lot of stuff that you aren't thinking about right now that you will encounter when you try to solve that, and you start Googling and coming up with well, how do I represent the maze? I know it's going to look like this on the screen, and then you're like, oh, this is in memory. This is a matrix in memory that I need to traverse with a character. And so, you're learning how to program and use these concepts and structures that you've never used before, and you're learning a lot just to do a simple game like Pac-Man. So if you're going to learn how to program, I would say try to make something in Lua, which is a really simple language that's C-based. And C is the foundational language of pretty much everything that's popular today, even Java and C++ and C# and even Swift, So it's the foundational language, and Lua is exactly like C, but it removes all of the things that you need to know about memory, because memory management is a thing that complexifies the learning of a language. So Lua kind of gets rid of that. You just load something in off disk as an image, and you just put it on the screen, and you don't have to worry about like all the memory allocation and loading the image into that memory slot and freeing the memory and all this. You don't have to worry about that when you're doing stuff in Lua. It just does it for you behind the scenes. So if you get solar3d.com, if you go to solar3d.com, that's a game engine called Corona SDK that they're transitioning to Solar 2D. And that has delivered hundreds of games on the App Store, and it uses Lua as its language. And it doesn't have an IDE, an integrated development environment, the way that Unity and Unreal has. You can use Sublime, you can use like any text editor that you want. It doesn't have a strict structure for how you're supposed to do things. You do things the way that you want to do them. So it tells you how to do things that you probably want to do. How do you put an image on the screen, and how do you move things around and get mouse input and all that kind of stuff. And just you only need some of that to make a game anyway, so you can get going pretty quickly.
Yeah, thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, I was about to drift slightly the conversation towards the idea of modding, because I know that Wolfenstein and Doom are responsible for a lot of video game developers who grew up just modding and creating all sorts of WODs for Doom and for video games that you designed. And I think part of the reason why we have all of this open source software nowadays that's being developed, and you see lots of abandonware that's being revived. I think Caesar Free is a game that I had in my childhood and right now has like free implementations in GitHub. And I'm really grateful that you had this shareware distribution, because a lot of people got to taste the games and try them for the first time and then purchase the full version and modded them. And this was like a ramp towards their career in video game design or programming.
Yep, yeah, that was even in like the early, before shareware, which for games started probably in '89. Shareware started in '87, mostly for utilities, and it wasn't done the same way that we did it, because there were a couple of years, there were several years there where people started calling shareware nagware, because they gave you the entire utility and they would always ask for money. Like, did you register it? Could you please register this? You know, they didn't, and sometimes they would call it crippleware. So like, if you were using it, it wouldn't give you everything that you wanted, but you would have to pay for it to get the full version, you know. And with shareware, what we did was we made 3 games and gave you one entire game for free, and all 3 tied together into a story. And so that let you have one chunk for free. Please copy it and give it to everybody, which is not what anyone has done before. And before we were doing that, games, you could only go to the store and look at the box and hope that the game was that cool. You know, like you couldn't try it ever. And there were no such things as demos for games before we made our shareware games. There weren't downloadable demos, and there were no cover discs on magazines. So you always went to the store and just hoped that the cool description on the back of the box was what you were going to get. So yeah, so it was like before it was just companies made lots of money off of just marketing and not, you know, people weren't as networked. There weren't information sources to have all these reviews. You would have to buy a magazine to read whether a movie was good, you know, because if you knew a game was good, because you couldn't actually try it, because they never put anything for download. So it was just like, wow. And then when we put our games out, we're like, you can have the game and please give it to everybody. And if you like that, then pay us for the other parts of the story, because you liked the first part that we gave you. On top of that, when we were making Doom, because it was we put the shareware version out there, we also contacted everybody that had CDs or boxes on the shelf in the stores. We contacted them and said, we have a game that's coming out. It's going to be really big. If you put it in the store in a box, you can keep all the money. We don't want any of it. We're putting this game called Doom in shareware, downloadable, so everyone can download it for free. But there's a lot of people that don't know how to do that, and they just they've heard about it and they want to go to the store and buy it. Please put it in a box. You design the box however you want, and then put it on the shelf, and you get to keep that money. And please don't charge more than $9. Right. So back when Doom came out, you would go into a store and there would be like 10 different boxes of Doom, all with different art, and they all have the same shareware version on. It's just like, which box looked coolest, you know? So that's never happened again, really. Like that was the only time that happened.
There's collectibles on eBay. I think they sell.
There's a lot of them on eBay. Yeah, I collect a lot of them too, because just you find out about new ones that came out back then. and it was
That
totally
a
legal.
genius move.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
super smart, and they got the game out everywhere in stores because they want to make money. They don't have to pay us. They can just put it in the store and make tons of money. Like, who does that? Here's a game for free, best game in the world. You can sell it for free. You can sell it, and not give us any money. How's that? When's that ever happened?
Never again.
Never again. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was really cool.
And speaking of demos, those kind of went away as well.
Demos. Well, there's a lot of free to play games now.
Yeah,
So,
and
you
demos
know,
are starting to make like a comeback as well, for some games at least. Speaking of that, will we get a demo for Empire of Sin by any chance?
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure we're gonna do that. I mean, whatever Paradox does is what we're gonna be doing.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I can't
Speaking
say
of
whether
it-
we are or not, but just like if they want us to make one, then we're making one.
That would be pretty cool. Because I think it will give a lot more people the chance to try it out. You know, I mean, I know I'm gonna buy it because it's you and Brenda, so definitely I want to try that out. Plus, it's the kind of game that's like right up my alley. But yeah, it would be pretty cool for
It is.
people to be able to try it out.
There's a lot of marketing that we've been doing as well with it. So if you check out the podcasts, I think, or the Twitch streams that we do, we kind of focus on one of the characters in the game and kind of talk about them and play them for a while, because there's a ton of them in the game.
And one of them is based on like your great grandmother, which is another awesome story.
Yep. Yeah. So you can play a 70-year-old woman in the game, all right, who's a mob, badass killer, and so she's based on, like, she looks like my grandma and she is my great grandma, so it's a fusion of both of them into one character. But yeah, there's a lot of other characters in there that are totally real people that were really around. So yeah, it's a really good mix of characters and tons of stories. It's the game is pretty cool. It's different than I guess like other strategy games, because it's got lots of missions in it and lots of cool stuff to read and characterization and all that kind of stuff.
We're really looking forward to that one.
I'd like to know if you still work while listening to a similar playlist that you've listened to while making games like Doom, and if so, can we find that playlist somewhere?
Well, it depends on the game I'm making. So when I'm doing, so like with Empire of Sin, I'm doing all the audio in the game. So all the music, all the talking, the VO, all the sound effects, everything. I've basically worked with composers for the music. We have a VO producer that handles all of the direction and recording of the VO, and then I put it everywhere in the game that it's supposed to go. The sound effects, some of the sound effects were done by a sound effects engineer, and I made all the rest of the sound effects, which it's got a ton of them. So everything that you hear in the game was what I made, and so it's and I'm just one person on the team. The rest of the team is doing a ton of other work. So it is like the game is packed full of stuff. But I there's a specific sound that I wanted in the game, and it's all dependent on what Brenda likes as well, because this is her game. It's her vision, it's her design, and I'm here to help her create that game, create that vision. And so if she doesn't like something, then I change it. I make sure it's consistent through the whole game. So yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's like turning out to be great.
I also have a personal question for you, because when I had my first computer, which was a Pentium 1, I could not run Quake, but I was very much aware that it exists and it has mind-blowing graphics, even by the standards of the year 1999 when I got my first computer. And do you ever just think at night that you're responsible for selling all of these overpriced video cards?
Well, yeah, we knew that. I mean, we were helping those hardware manufacturers before the cards were ever released. So when NVIDIA was planning their chipset for the first time, we were basically telling them how they needed to handle the polygons coming into their card, like how we wanted to talk to their card to create the API between our code and their hardware. And we did that with a lot of different manufacturers of video cards before they came out. We helped establish the way that you talk to those cards based on how we did our own software rendering and how we would want to engineer the code for future games to be able to speak to some external entity that would create the scenes for us. So that was a lot of planning for years before those video cards ever came out. We were working with them to make sure that it was going to be done the right way, that we would want to be talking to these cards versus a card manufacturer never having consulted with video game programmers and coming up with something that everybody was mad at. It came out the way that it should. 3DFX had a really great, Glide was a really nice API, and the other manufacturers also came up with, similar approaches to how you would talk to it. And then Microsoft, comes in and with DirectX, and then that solidified how you would be talking to cards. But I'm going to have to take off because it's like 16 minutes late, and I have stuff I have to do to prepare for the next thing.
Of course, man.
That's
Cool.
fine. Thank you very much for your time again, John. This has been absolutely a pleasure and amazing.
Cool. Thanks a
for
lot.
all the info.
All right. No
Also,
problems.
let us know when you get the magazine because I sent it to you last week.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. That's awesome.
All right.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Have a
John.
good
Bye-bye.
one.
Okay. Have fun.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
You too.
See y'all.
Acum
Da,
continuăm
ne-a tot
sau
zis.
încheiem?
Băi, trebuie să-mi iau pastilele, cred.
De ce, mă, te lasă inima?
Nu știu, mă amețesc medicamentele astea, să am o stare de căcat. Sau de pișat, vorba lui ăsta.
Sincer, mi se pare că a fost un podcast bun, fără să mă cac pe mine. Știu că suntem live, dar cred că am putea să încheiem pe tonul ăsta și să fie episodul cu Romero decât să, nu știu, ajungem să vorbim tot fără de căcaturi și tâmpenii.
Stai, mă.
Hai să lăsăm o
Deci
ediție
am
curată,
atins apogeul
știi?
chiar la final, știi? Suntem la 69 de oameni care se uită acum.
69, ok.
Eram la 50 și ceva în timp ce era Romero aici, deci a avut așa un
Când a plecat
crescendo.
Romero a început să vină lumea, nu?
Exact.
Mi-a
Chima,
plăcut.
dar ai fost așa tăcut, mă așteptam să zici și tu ceva, nu știu.
Bă, n-am starea necesară, ți-am zis. Pastilat tot și nu știu. Bă, mi-a cam răspuns la întrebări, sincer.
Alea pe care nu le-ai pus.
Alea pe care nu le-am pus. Adică, nu știu, vreau să ne întreb ceva legat de trendurile actuale din industrie vis-a-vis de modul în care evoluează sau involuează genul first person shooter, dar sincer mi-a răspuns la întrebarea asta data trecută, în discuția cu Aidan, deci cumva e irelevant. Dar în rest, da, mi-au plăcut amintirile lui din copilărie, sunt chiar lecții de istorie, ca să zic așa.
Pe mine m-a surprins că e așa pasionat de hardware, nu mă așteptam.
Da, a fost un pic căsut.
Da, mai ales cu telefoanele. Ok.
Și nu mă așteptam la Apple, la iPhone, la astea.
Mai el pe asta a început să facă primele jocuri, deci probabil că e fanboy.
Așa că, Mihai,
Și până la urmă sunt destul de
MacBook.
competente. Sunt destul de competente ca mașinării de dezvoltare, știi?
Da,
Chiar.
hardware-ul bun, hardware-ul bun.
Sunt scumpe, dar nu.
Deci fac treaba bine.
Da.
Da.
Bun. Păi,
Da, mie mi-a
încheiem?
plăcut, a fost entertaining.
A fost fain.
Eu zic să încheiem pe o notă pozitivă de data asta.
Deci
Putem
toate
să-
subiectele din ultima săptămână, lansarea
Foame.
Xbox, probabil vom avea și PlayStation săptămâna viitoare și putem
Da.
să comparăm.
Bă,
Ok.
am putea vorbi puțin despre Ubi Forward, care mi se pare un fel de Ubi Backward. L-au mutilat pe prințul persan săracul. Am făcut o față de... nu știu, în fine.
bă, nu știu, am văzut doar niște screenshot-uri și mă uitam dacă e pe bune sau fac ăștia Caterinca, știi? Nu știu, habar
da.
n-am văzut. N-am
Eu
văzut
mă
clip sau
așteptam
ceva.
la un Splinter Cell nou, poate un Prince of Persia nou, dacă nu era vorba de un Splinter Cell nou. Nu o să fie nici un Splinter Cell nou prea curând și apare nici un Prince of Persia nou, dar o să avem remake-ul pentru The Sands of Time, care în general arată ok pentru generația actuală. Ai PS3, Xbox 360 și atât. Și prințul arată, săracul, de zici că a fost tăiat cu lama pe față în puii mei și au rămas niște urme negre. În fine. Pare cioplit. Da. În fine,
nu știu.
să vedem. Da, e ciudat.
Zici că fac băieții game design cu Dalta.
Da, exact. Că în cazul lui, da, așa s-a întâmplat. Da, ok, o să vedem. Păcat că nu e un nou joc Prince of Persia. Oi mei. Nici Splinter Cell. Da, n-am rămas cu nimic după Ubi Forward. Înainte de Ubi Forward, Yves Guillemot mi se pare, da, chiar el și-a prezentat niște scuze în mod public pentru modul în care au fost tratați și abuzați diversi angajați ai companiei în trecut. Și a promis că nu se va mai întâmpla. Rămâne de văzut.
Da, ok.
Da.
Dar da, cam târziu, dar noi, hai să zicem că e bine și așa. Poate niciodată nu e prea târziu. Și cam astea au fost noutățile. Mă rog, ce am prins eu între pauzele în care nu mă dureau nimic.
Bine, azi sau ieri a fost National Video Game Day în Statele Unite. Azi e aniversarea lui Mario, de 35 de ani de când a fost lansat primul Super Mario Bros. Pe NES.
La
Și
mulți ani,
tot
Mario!
astăzi se lansează și compilația Super Mario All Stars 3D, care conține Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine și Super Mario Galaxy, toate de pe sisteme Nintendo, toate tridimensionale. Și mulți s-au plâns de faptul că nu sunt remasteruri în adevăratul sens al cuvântului și sunt doar upscaled, nici nu știu cum să spun, au mărit pur și simplu, au lărgit imaginea să poată să fie reprezentată pe ecranele care acum nu mai sunt pătrate și sunt largi.
Da, nu știu să zic. Poate că e încă o vacă de mulți acolo.
Păi e 60 de euro pe asta?
Da, exact. Pe upscale-ul ăla, așa că de ce să investim în ceva nou când uite cum vin banii din ceva vechi upscale.
Bine, toate la pachet sunt 60 de euro, deci cred că dacă te apuci să le cumperi pe cele vechi, te costă mai mult.
Da, îți dai seama că n-a fost mare efort să facă upscale-ul ăla acolo. Dacă s-ar apuca de ceva nou, îți dai seama, vorbești de alte investiții.
Îmi pare rău că n-au apucat în perioada cât a fost aici Romero să-l punem măcar să răspundă în 10 secunde la întrebări de pe chat, știi? Să luăm una aleatorie și să spunem ce părere ai despre, nu știu, cineva a vrut să știe despre Call of Duty sau
Cineva
alte
a vrut
chestii.
să știe despre Daikatana 2. Nu cred că...
Dar el mi-am dat seama că are mintea foarte organizată, știi? Îți lua întâi întrebarea direct, după care încerca să-și dea seama ce ai vrut să spui cu asta și spunea și ceva personal la final. Avea cumva, dacă asculți felul cum vorbește, e foarte organizat felul cum își organizează argumentele.
Și are și foarte multă experiență în a răspunde la interviuri și mers și vorbit la conferințe și tot fel de
30 de ani, 40 de ani urmă.
N-am avut nici pauze, deci a fost...
Da.
Ba chiar am vorbit unii peste alții.
Da.
Nu chiar așa de rău, cred că a fost decent.
Îmi pare rău că am vorbit mai mult decât voi, dar mai aveam o listă întreagă în caz
Ai vorbit și tu?
se întâmpla
Da,
ceva.
s-a părut. Chiar ok. Nu, ce m-a bucurat e că el chiar a vorbit cel mai mult și asta și trebuia să se întâmple. Pentru că n-a interesat ce are de zis el, că de noi sunt sătui ăștia ai noștri.
Ei, da.
Aduceți voi, altcineva.
Uite, Porcus ne spune că this is where it goes downhill.
După cum era de
nu,
așteptat.
chiar nu mi se pare. De data asta chiar nu se duce la vale. Pentru că n-am voie să beau.
Uite, eu am corona.
Da, în sfârșit bea și
În
Vlad.
sfârșit ai băut și tu jumătate de bere.
În timpul podcastului cu Romero. E prima mea corona. Acum că am spus corona, probabil o să
Sperăm
primim avertisment din ăla sub video.
Nu, că trebuie să spui, știi tu ce? Trebuie să spui celălalt cuvânt.
Ah,
Să apară.
bacterie, da.
bacterie din bere.
Da, uite, ne întreabă cineva dacă în următorul chemăm pe Carmen, că ar fi o treabă.
Nu, eu mă gândeam la Tom Hall, la modul cel mai serios. Ei doi sunt prieteni și Tom Hall e cel mai prietenos din absolut toți. Mi-a răspuns de câteva ori pe Twitter. Dacă îi spun, hei, noi am făcut interviu cu Romero, nu vrei și tu? Cu siguranță o să spună da.
Sună bine.
E o treabă.
Da, de ce nu?
Și la Carmack e bossul final, așa mi-l imaginez, e cel mai greu de convins. Probabil la el ajungi după ce îi spui, hei, am vorbit cu toată echipa ta, inclusiv Adrian Carmack. Nu vrei și
Am
tu?
vorbit cu fratele tău.
În
Dacă
locul de ce ai
aude-
de spus în apărarea ta, știi?
Da. S-ar putea să nu vină dacă îi zici asta. Mai bine nu.
Bă, dar nu știu dacă Carmen mai are treabă cu gaming-ul acum.
No, e cu
Că a plecat
VR.
și de la Oculus.
Nu mai e
A
cu
plecat de
VR.
la Oculus?
Nu mai e
Da,
cu
da,
VR,
da.
acum face inteligență artificială.
Da, mă, da.
ok.
Dar credeam că era și cu Oculus încă. Ok.
Mi se pare că a rămas doar ca, nu știu, membru onorific sau ceva. de
Consultant,
genul.
chestii.
Da.
Ok. Interesant.
Și Oculus a făcut exact ceea ce spunea că nu va face atunci când i-a cumpărat Facebook.
Da, bine. Când te cumpără Facebook, trebuie să te aștepți la...
Că de anul
La
viitor
orice.
nu vei mai putea să folosești Oculus fără cont de Facebook.
Exact. Sau nu o să mai poți folosi Facebook fără Oculus. Știi?
Oh. Asta e next
Așa,
level.
bă, exact.
Peste 25 de ani, poate, dacă
Mai
mai
știi,
există
cred
Facebook.
că mai devreme. Și fără facial recognition, CNP și mai știu eu ce, știi?
Da, trebuie să dai buletin, nu?
Da. Oricum acum trebuie să-l dai, știi? Dacă ar
Da,
raportat
de fapt,
unul
da.
că, de exemplu, tu
Nu te
zici,
cheamă.
tu zici Mihai Kiki Caca. Și vine unul, bă, care te știe, știi, dar vrea să o facă, știi?
Da,
Bă,
da.
nu-l cheamă așa. Ia. Și
Bagă buletinul.
prost de la Facebook te caută și își cere buletinul ca să îți pui numele real. Da, ok. Ești și mai targetat după aia cu ad-uri și orice altceva. Plus că știu unde stai.
Deja știi.
Exact. Nu
Se
mai...
primește ad-uri Facebook prin poștă.
Exact. Cutia poștală.
Old school spam, știi?
Să ieși la geam și o să vezi baloane.
Porumbei. O să am porumbei care mă așteaptă.
Da, chiar vin porumbei la tine cu ad.
Iau pe rând de la fiecare.
Ți le dau sub formă de găinați pe geam, știi? Găinațul o să fie, nu știu, o să-ți transmită un mesaj. Buy Apple. Buy more video games.
Dacă aveai Apple, nu se căca pe geamul tău.
Ca pe geamul vecinului, da? Ăla din față și tu să vezi reclama acolo, da, chiar. Reclamă targetată, se numește asta. Da.
Mi-a plăcut de Romero că la prima întrebare m-a făcut să mă simt ca un idiot. A zis, da, tu n-ai Google, n-ai căutat, nu? Atunci
chiar
bine,
așa.
o să continui.
Dar nu cred, mă, că nu știu
Chestia
dacă e
e că-
informație care apare neapărat pe net. Cred că s-ar
Vlad-
putea să avem unul dintre
Lasă,
cele
mă,
mai
păi să
random
mai...
fapte
povestească
despre
și el.
Dangerous Dave în podcast.
Vlad, trebuie să zic ceva.
Spune.
Atunci când atunci când ai întrebat chestia, că ai zis că vrei să pui întrebarea aia, eu primul lucru a fost să-l caut pe Google
Ai găsit?
Așa?
și am găsit. Dar n-am vrut să stric întrebarea sau șansa de a-l întreba pe Romero chestia asta. Pe viitor.
Oricum fac Google pe bune, lasă-mă pace, m-a săturat de internet.
Sau se găsește destul de ușor, dar a fost mai fain răspunsul lui. Adică aș prefera să aud răspunsul lui în loc de
Exact.
Mă, chestia e că atunci când aveam 10 ani, da? Dacă aș fi avut ocazia să mă întâlnesc cu el și să vorbesc cu el, îi ziceam, bă, ce înseamnă aia? Adică e o chestie care a durat 18 ani la mine, aproape 20. Să stau față în față, virtual, mă rog. Omul să zic, bă, când mă jucam eu jocurile tale, am văzut asta și n-am știut ce înseamnă. E mult mai personal decât să mă apuc să-l întreb, nu știu. Orice
mine-
altceva ce probabil că a spus deja de 100 de ori.
Da.
Ce a făcut cu Daikatana sau dacă ne mai face curvele lui.
Ne face, dar să-ți dai seama, o să-i placă, nu face cu ură. Și nouă. M-a surprins că îi place Breakpoint. Deci după un an de zile sau 2 de la lansare a devenit bun jocul, l-au preparat,
Aparent, așa se pare.
Acum o să fim obligați să-l încercăm toți.
Acum o să mă duc să încerc, dar a fost să mi se pară cam tot pe acolo unde era și acum un an de zile. Îl mai chem o dată, eu personal, pe Romero.
Să dea un review.
Să facem o bătălie de aia, cum zice.
Dați un raid.
Da. Fac un raid cu Romero, știi? El pe hardcore, eu pe modul safe mode. Să vedem cât de bine a ieșit noua versiune. Da, ok. Jocul, e adevărat, jocul ar fi cu 50% mai bun decât varianta de la lansare, dacă au scăpat de hub-urile alea gen The Division, deși mă îndoiesc.
Apropo de The Division, sunt 2 persoane pe chat care vor să știe dacă ești fan de The Division și dacă mănânci
sunt
ciocolată
fan, dar-
africană.
Nu, că n-am avut bani de africană. Am luat una cu...
Laura?
Nu, mai no name. Am găsit cu 1 leu ceva. Și am luat mai
Da,
multe.
există ciocolată mai ieftină decât africana?
Există! Multe.
Oh, wow.
Ciocolata de casă.
Da, nu. Astea
Păi să stai, tu aveai probleme cu rinichii.
sunt primite aseară de la maică mea. Mi-a dat 2 ciocolăți când am... N-am voie?
Sau la ficatul cu care ai probleme, nu știu.
Nu mai e rinichii, sunt rinichii. Stai,
Nu, dar de la ciocolată
mică.
poți să ai probleme cu rinichii, cred că doar de la ce bei poți să ai probleme cu rinichii. Cu ficatul
Da.
ai de la ce mănânci.
Dacă avem doctor în chat,
Nu, eu am probleme cu rinichii, nu cu ficatul. Deci pot să mănânc ciocolată.
dar nu lichidă.
Păi nu e lichidă. Mâncat-o. Jesus. Tablete. Notificații. Da. Da, ok. Bine, mă. Păi, zic că a ieșit frumos. A venit Romero. Deci. Altfel e și ea, sunt sigur. La fel de bine ca data trecută. Podcastul nu cred că era o problemă.
Nu-l aveam pe Aidan.
Da. Poate apărea, să știi. Bă, n-a venit Romero, poți să... E loc. Și intră, Păi,
M-aș fi bucurat să fi fost și el aici.
Acum nu, are treabă. Data trecută a fost, n-a venit.
Cam nașpa, da.
Nu. Omul și-a făcut alte planuri, nu s-a gândit că chiar vine. Sincer,
Deci facem o versiune
a fost
cu
50-50.
subtitrare în română din
la un
interviu.
moment dat, cred că putem încerca.
Putem să
ceva
punem
de genul,
subtitrări.
știi?
Putem uploada subtitrări.
Și când vorbim noi în română, punem în engleză subtitrare? Acum,
Nu,
de exemplu,
doar
bucata
partea
asta
și o
de
încărcăm
jumătate.
separat. Înțelegi?
Da, partea separat merge. Știi?
A durat fix o oră. Omul s-a uitat la ceas tot timpul, cred.
Da.
Nu tot timpul. Aveam în minte ora, exact.
Da, avea și
Termină.
alte planuri. Ne-a anunțat dinainte că o să poate o oră, deci
Chiar e
chiar a
curios.
stat un pic peste.
O vorbit de numele podcastului lui, mai știți cum se chema?
Da,
Apple
cred că
ceva.
îl găsești ușor. Nu cred că mai răbrânză.
Da.
Google,
Mai ușor
Google.
decât al nostru.
Google, nu DuckDuckGo. Că cine știe ce găsești.
Da, mie îmi place DuckDuckGo. Dar în același timp am apreciat faptul că el face exact ceea ce facem și noi, doar că din altă postură.
Da.
Din postura de legendă. Noi mai avem un pic.
Noi am început de jos, de la nivelul
Până
1.
atingem statutul ăla, da. Bine, trebuie să facem și toți câte un joc. Sau, nu știu, facem toți împreună. Auzi că trebuie să-ți faci echipă. Te-ai gândit pe cine e?
Cui îi place software-ul?
Cui îi place să aibă
Să
firmă?
folosească sau
Cui îi place să aibă firmă în România? El așa a zis, fă-ți o firmă. No.
Oh, ficatul.
Nu, nimic, ficat, inimă, plămâni. Da. Nu-i rău.
Da.
Bă, înainte să adoarmă Adrian sau ce pățește el imediat, zic să încheiem.
Ar fi o treabă.
Că trebuie să mănânc, să prind câinele și să mă culc chiar. Și să beau pastilele.
Sună bine.
O sună bine? Da, ok.
Sună ca și cum ai ieșit la pensie.
Sună ca și cum ești
trebuie să-mi iau
mai un pic
pastilele și
da,
să mă
exact.
culc, știi? Exact, da.
Mâine iar pastile.
După aia mâine trebuie să-ți duci nepoții la grădiniță. De
Exact. Da, mai bine nu.
Da, eu mă întorc în 20 de secunde, vreau doar să arăt revista 1,5 pe care o am pe noptieră. Mă întorc.
Întoarce-te. Come back.
Baby, don't go. Mai fuma, mă, că te îmbolnăvești.
Lasă-mă în pace, ce deja sunt bună. Okay.
Da, deci asta e revista. O să o țin aici. Scrie ediție specială.
Da, așa se vede. Da.
Nu-mi dau seama cum se vede.
Ok.
E la fel de groasă și la fel de lucioasă precum precedenta. Are toate articolele, plus încă 2 bonus pe care le-am adăugat cu Mihnea, că am decis să extindem puțin. 108 pagini, parcă? 104 pagini, ceea ce înseamnă că are cu 16 pagini mai puțin decât cea anterioară. O voi scoate săptămâna viitoare la tipografie și o voi livra celor care ne-au donat minim $6 pe Patreon și au mai fost și câțiva care ne-au donat 6 înainte și au acumulat peste $100 total în donații și m-am gândit, hei, de ce să nu le dau și lor câte o revistă? În total vor fi 80 cei care vor primi varianta tipărită de noi. Toți ceilalți care ne-au dat câte $1 sau $3 sau $5 și nu au acumulat o sumă prea mare, pot să descarce PDF-ul, care, apropo, va fi modificat din nou, că am mai găsit greșeli citind revista Răsfoindo, și va fi modificat din nou și puteți să-l descărcați probabil săptămâna viitoare, când avem chiar varianta finală, nu mai lucrăm la ea din acel moment, și să vă scoateți propriile exemplare, să le faceți cadou de Crăciun, de Moș Nicolae, de zile de naștere, să le vindeți dacă vreți, sincer nu mă interesează.
Cum ar fi ca cineva să-și facă un business mai bun decât noi și să vândă reviste mai multe?
Bă, Doamne ajută, deci pe bune.
Nu, ne-ar ajuta și
însemna
pe noi, că m-am gândit la asta. Ne-ar ajuta și pe noi,
shareware, știi?
Da, exact.
Shareware, așa.
că sunt mai mulți oameni care află și vor avea doar revistele pe care noi le-am făcut înainte, nu cele la care lucrăm deja, știi?
Mhm. Așa e.
Deci pot să devină multimilionar. Doamne ajută dacă se vând în România reviste.
Mă îndoiesc, da.
Dar nu o să cerem nimic cât timp suntem noi cei care primim credit că am scris articolele și oamenii știu unde să vină dacă vor să citească lucrările viitoare.
Pe Discord.
Îți dai seama că s-ar îmbogăți, dar ar fi one hit wonder, știi? A doua oară e pe bani.
Nu știu la ce te referi.
Adică nu. Păi, îl lași pe unul să se îmbogățească pe munca ta și a doua oară să nu dea nimic, dacă mai vrea să facă?
Sincer, în cazul ăsta, da. Dar mă referam la partea cu a doua oară pe bani. Adică nu știu unde ai auzit tu sintagma asta.
Romero zicea ceva de genul ăsta, știi? Partea de demo, shareware, știi?
Eu încercam să sugerez altă chestie, că ai fost în altă viață un gigolo.
Nu. Nu.
Poate e în viața asta, mă.
Hai să nu mai sugerăm. Da.
Nu știm ce faci în timpul liber.
De la asta e durerea de rinic.
Da, exact, sunt supra-solicitat, m-am secat, Da.
Ok, bun. Păi încheiem? Mă rog.
Bine, Adriane, somn ușor.
Uite, înainte să încheiem Chimo, vreau doar să știi că e Quantum pe chat care spune: salut băieți, am venit să-l văd pe Chimo, nu l-am mai văzut de mult.
Salut.
Deci,
De la ultimul podcast sau?
nu știu. Poate era curios să te vadă, poate te-a văzut la spital când ai fost și tu
Salut,
nu știi
Quantum.
asta.
Nu. Dar hai să nu vorbim de... nu vreau să-mi aduc aminte. Don't go there. Don't go to hospital. Nu sunați la ambulanță. Stați acasă. E ok. Da. Da, e bine, e în regulă. Putem încheia. Vă mulțumim. Mulțumim, Romero. Pa, băieți.
Salutare!
Ne vedem săptămâna viitoare, când
Da.
poate avem prețul la PlayStation.
Cu siguranță, poate nu.
Gata, l-am închis.
Gata, mă pot să...